hearts be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer.
Amen.
Today's gospel passage probably requires a retranslation, and that's why I gave you a sheet. This sheet of paper is the parable of the Great Supper, which is the gospel for today, and it only takes part in two gospels, in Matthew and Luke. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It doesn't take place in Mark and John, just Matthew and Luke. So, first century Palestine and today, very different places, very different cultures. Not only marriage, but a lot of other cultural things. But our gospel today focuses on marriage. And Jesus compares the kingdom of heaven to a marriage feast given by a slave-owning king. Now, slave-owning kings were quite normal back then too. Thank goodness they're not here today. But marriage was very different than it is in the 21st century. Marriage was a financial commitment between two men, the bride's father and the groom. Now, in Jesus' time, women were exchanged like plots of land or herds of sheep. They were simply bought and sold by the men of the world. And so the men owned them. The period of betrothal was not so much a time where the two people got to know each other and fall in love. The period of betrothal was kind of a grace period. A grace period where the person who, the groom who got the bride, would get to have her around to see if she worked out. And if she worked out, he would keep her. If she didn't work out, then he could quietly dismiss her. Remember, Joseph and Mary. Joseph took Mary even though she was pregnant. Now, technically, during that betrothal period, he could have said, I don't want to be with you anymore. But the angel came to him, thank goodness, right? And he didn't cast her out, so we Christians are here. If he had not wanted her, he could have cast her out, and she probably would have been stoned or killed because she was pregnant. Now, first century, technologies of birth control didn't exist, so women were really human birthing machines. So you'd have an 11 or 12 or 13-year-old given to a groom. The groom usually paid the father money for the person. They probably never even met before. And they would have their period of betrothal, which could have been up to a year. And typically, if they got along, they would then have a wedding feast. Typically, a woman had a child every year, up till about 10 children. Now remember, back in that time, infants died often. So if you had 4 or 5 children, then you had really done well in life. Because remember, there was no nursing home or nursing care. Your children took care of you. So if you didn't have any children, you wouldn't have anyone take care of you. The more children you had, the better life you had as you grew older. So, and they had singing and dancing. That's what a feast was. So, so that all of that kind of goes into the gospel we read. So now you're going to look at your paper that I gave you. We know that Matthew and Luke are the only ones, Mark and John did not cover this story in their gospel. We know that Mark was the first gospel that was written. Mark was written first, and Matthew, John, and Luke all used the gospel of Mark to help write their gospel. So Matthew, we figure, in his gospel, we figure that his gospel had to be written before 110 AD, because Ignatius, who died in 115, referenced the Gospel of Matthew in one of his teachings, in one of his sermons, and we have that evidence. So Matthew was written before 110. Luke, on the other hand, the writer of Luke also wrote the Acts of the Apostles, right? Now, neither Matthew, take that back. Luke did not mention two very important things that happened. He didn't mention the fall of the temple in 70 AD, and he didn't mention Nero's persecution, which took place in 64 AD. Now, we know that the Gospels were about Jesus' life, but Acts of the Apostles was about the early church. And if it had been written after the fall of the temple or the persecution of the Christians, it would have been in the Acts. It would have been written in there. It wasn't mentioned. So we believe that both Luke and Acts were written before 64. And that's very different than what I learned in seminary. This is all new evidence that's come forth. So we're looking at two Gospels with two different stories. The same idea, a great supper, a wedding feast, or a feast, but told a little differently. We believe that Luke's version was more probably the version that Jesus told than the version we heard today. So let's look at the differences between the two versions, between Matthew and Luke. Matthew gave a marriage feast for his son. A marriage feast for his son. The householder in Luke just gave a great banquet. It wasn't a marriage feast, it was just a great banquet. They both invited people ahead of time, because in both Gospels it says that after the feast was set, the servants or slaves went out to tell those invited to come to the feast. None of the ones who were invited wanted to come. So we have two different reasons why they didn't want to come. And Luke, there are reasons that they gave to the servants when they went out to ask them. One said he bought a field, one said he bought 5 oxen of yoke, and one said he got married. And none of those could come to the feast. Now, if you got married, you got out of everything. Being married, you could even not go into military service if you were married. If you were married, you stayed home. useful for us in the future. And so, this man, who doesn't have a wedding garment on, comes to the wedding, and they're all sitting, eating, drinking, and the king comes out, and he notices there's someone without a wedding garment. Now, I want you to think of this parable in this way. Remember, Jesus is talking about the kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven. The king gave a feast, okay? So we have two different kinds of people in the kingdom of heaven, right? Well, first of all, God's goal, and we say it every day in the Lord's Prayer, is that thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So the whole goal of the church and Jesus is to get the kingdom of heaven up there, down here. To have people live a life that is kingdom-like. So I want you to look at this gospel in two ways. The people that were first invited to the kingdom, you guys on this side of the church, you guys were invited the first time, you didn't come, right? You didn't come. You all are compared to the people who don't know about the gospel. You're not Christian, you could be Muslim, Jew, whatever. You guys are invited, you didn't hear how good the banquet was going to be, so you just didn't come. While you guys over here were invited, and you came, but Brian forgot to wear his wedding garment. Now, so you all participated fully in the party, in the kingdom of heaven, but Brian didn't participate fully. He just participated half-heartedly. Now think about your life here, now, today. Isn't that the way it is out in our culture? There are some people that have not heard the word of God, have not become Christian, have not, participated in the kingdom of heaven coming down here. And there are people who have heard the word of God and have participated. But have you guys participated 100% every single time? I haven't. So you all are the ones that have participated, but maybe haven't participated fully in bringing the kingdom of heaven here. So, the writer of Matthew says, well, that person who didn't participate fully, we're going to bind him up, and we're going to toss him into the outer darkness. Brian, you're going in the outer darkness. Now think about it. God could have done anything. Our God could do anything. Our God could sit down here and zap us immediately and we would be gone. That's how powerful our God is. Our God can do anything. Anything. But our God is a loving God. A God who wants us to come. A God who continues to invite us to the wedding feast. No matter how many times you turn him down, he invites you again and again and again. Now, he could, if Brian didn't participate fully in the gospel, he could throw him out into the outer darkness, but that's not the God we have. Our God is the God of love, and when we don't participate fully, he invites us again to participate a little more each time. And so, the wedding feast that God gives us is not an exorbitant, over-the-top party. It's simply bread and wine. And some of us need it so often we come to church every week. Because let me tell you, I need that food to make it through my week. And so that bread and wine feeds me and fills me for the week. There are some people that are filled by it for a month, or maybe forever, once they receive it. But that wedding feast is for all of us. We are invited over and over and over again to receive God's gift. And we all get the same gift. Whoever comes to the feast gets the same gift. We all get the amazing, abundant, undeserved, and unexhaustible gift of love from God. That's what we get when we come to the wedding feast. So, God's the host. The food is rich and beyond our imagination. And we are on a journey. And we need sustenance to keep us on that journey. And that's the gift of Christ's body and blood. So, the next time you're invited to a wedding feast and you're busy, gotten there yet. But we continue to invite people. We continue to listen to God and to accept His invitation to come and be part of the banquet and the feast. So the next time you're invited to something, or the next time you see someone in need, and you feel that you can help them, then do it. That's all part of the banquet. We want as many people as we can to come to the banquet. And they don't have to come in those doors. They just have to know Jesus. They have to know the Christ. And with that knowledge, they will receive that gift, the abundant, undeserved, never-ending love of God. And when we all have that, then salvation is won, and the kingdom of heaven is here. So next time you're ready for a feast, show up.